Hello, and thank you for attending today's webinar on finding evidence in a mountain of data, leveraging MarkLogic to gain insight into residential mortgage-backed securities data before and after legal proceedings have commenced. Our presenters today are David Carrott of MarkLogic and Michael Will of ESI Laboratory, DCL's affiliate specializing in the legal and financial services sectors. David will lead off today and will be discussing the deployment of MarkLogic in the early phases of litigation. Michael will then share with us how ESI Laboratory has leveraged MarkLogic in the latter stages of litigation up to and including trials. David, over to you.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm David Carrott. I work with MarkLogic on the technical side, and I'm focused primarily in financial services. And as part of that, I've actually done a fair amount of work with mortgages in a variety of ways, including litigation support, legal discovery. And let me just give a few quick words about MarkLogic in general. We're a NoSQL database. We're one of our most famous deployments is we're the backbone behind Obamacare. We're also used extensively in many of the large banks, both for handling their publishing and for helping them with trades and in risk assessment and everything else. And the key things for why you use MarkLogic is it's really flexible and easy to get data in and out of, as we'll discuss. And we do happen to be the backbone behind the RMBS online platform that we're going to be talking about today. So let's talk a little about litigation support in general. So, as you all know, it's really important. It's a major cost of business. It can damage your reputation if you don't do it right, and it can even put you out of business because the government may shut you down or shut down important lines of business that you're engaged in. And so to handle litigation support properly is a difficult problem. You need a single source of truth. You have to bring together all the information pertaining to that specific lawsuit. And you need to be able to bring in new kinds of data. Every day there's something, there's Twitter and there's social media, there's Excel sheets, there's email, there's telephone calls. You have to be able to handle all of that, bring it in, quickly identify what's important and what's not important, filter it out, and you don't want it to bankrupt you just preparing for your case. And you have to be able to handle all of the governance and regulatory demands around you, and you need everything to be accurate. And if you're a very large firm, you may be sifting through billions of different documents out there. And sometimes, like if you're a bank and maybe you're being sued that somebody says, we're concerned about what's going on in Texas or a part of Texas, you have to be able to limit the scope of what you're doing to geospatial. And so again, everything that you do may get litigated upon. You don't get to, it's not that some documents are considered legal, some aren't. Anything signed by a specific officer, when you hired them, why you got rid of them, Word documents, your price lists, emails, all the transactions you've done with specific firms, all of those kind of things are constantly used as evidence in cases. So you have to bring all of that together. And the traditional relational databases that people have done this with in the past just aren't meant to handle all of that. So what happens is you have to hire all these people to sit there and sift through file cabinets, read things, decide by hand. And so it's very expensive, time consuming. If you miss stuff, you may get punished by the court for doing it wrong. And so a quick explanation of what the problem is can you easily assemble everything relating to a specific mortgage? Every check, all the statements, the credit reports, all the payments. Can you do the fraud detection to make it easy to handle? And timely response for all of this is hard to do. And so this slide shows all of the different kinds of technology and business silos that are there. You have marketing, customer service, your check processing, all your statements, and everything else. Some of it could even be in microfiche. And so you need to be able to pull that information together, make it accessible, get it to the lawyers so they know what to do with it. So how do we help? We've described the problem, and it is a big, expensive problem to handle. How do you make it work? So the key thing to MarkLogic is its time to market. So it gets rid of a huge amount of the work that you have with traditional systems, that you don't have to spend a lot of time explaining to MarkLogic how your data is structured, how it works. You don't have to do a lot of transforming of computer records to force them into a common model. That's what we do. We understand your data, we make it accessible with a fraction of the work. And the key thing here, the key to understanding it is, if you have a complex relational system, there's going to be lots of stuff that's not going to be relevant to you. And so with MarkLogic, you can focus in on just explaining to MarkLogic those things that truly matter for your case, and then harmonizing the data, we call it, and to make it easy to access, easy to understand, and then get that to the end users, and then the end users can understand everything about it. So we'll just figure out which documents you need, and then your lawyers can actually read the entire documents and understand them, but we don't need to know everything about what's in your data, while most of the older systems demand that you do that. So that's the key to our value prop. And I don't want to get too technical in this presentation, but there's a lot of technologies out there, and I just want to set the stage for how we fit in. So since the late 70s, almost all database technologies were built on what's called relational or SQL databases. So everything goes into rows. You have individual rows which are made up of columns, and then those rows turn into a table. And so you might have an order table, and then someplace else you'll have a customer table, and then you'll have an address table which will be linked to by the customer table. And so that's how you store data, and it worked very well. But then what was happening is it didn't scale very well for very large systems, and also when you had extremely complex data, it didn't handle it well. So around 2000, the flaws and the limitations of relational were becoming very apparent. So there was a renaissance in database technology, and a whole bunch of different new approaches came out that solved some of those problems. So you had document databases, which take like a Word document and store them, or you had key value stores, or you had graph databases, and a graph database is just storing facts, like John lives in London, London is in England, so therefore you know that John is in England. And so each of these solved the part of the problem that relational was doing, but the problem was none of them by themselves could do everything that relational could do. And there's a lot of vendors out there today selling these individual products. But the issue with most of our vendors is that almost all of our competitors are built on what's called open source technology. And open source means that each of these different technologies, document database, key value store, has its own set of developers creating their own group. So you have a technology group creating a document database, and a technology group creating a graph database. And then what happens is the vendors have to take all different pieces. They have to pull together their own graph database, their own document database, their own SQL database, and merge that into a single integrated whole. And then that just makes things complicated and hard and unreliable. And where we come in is that we do all of these different technologies in one place. So every MarkLogic instance is the same as every other one. All of the different technologies are built into one engine. So you can write a single query that does searching, that does inequalities, that does structured text, that does the graph queries, and give it to us as a single integrated whole. And then we'll take that and parse it and figure out how to query the database. So that makes it much faster to develop, much easier to develop, and that becomes a big part of the core of our faster time to market, along with the idea that we just mentioned, that you don't have to actually understand every single thing about the data. So this is a much more complicated example than you're going to get in most legal cases, unless you're doing mortgage-backed securities, because then mortgage-backed securities, you may have complex derivatives. But there's a standard called FPML, Financial Products Markup Language, that describes all the different kind of derivatives that are out there. And they have thousands of different messages describing different kind of aspects of the derivative industry, and every one of them has a slightly different structure. So if you want to load that into a relational database, you have to do what's on here. You have to break it into rectangles that make up the individual tables. So if you have a vanilla swap, you have to break it out to a trade, and then the trade will have a swap, and the swap will have a swap stream, and then the swap stream will have a variety of different dates and a period of calculation period amount, and then there'll be a whole bunch of other things. Those things, all those other lines are more tables. So every time one trade comes in, you have to break it into all those pieces, parse it, store it in all the different tables. Every time you want to pull that trade together, you have to now do what are called joins, where you're doing the initial green box and then also coming in and joining it to all of those other boxes. So getting data in and out becomes almost an impossible task. And with us, you just store it like this. This is the way that it comes from fpml.org, that we just take it, we store it. So now if you want to retrieve that this trade, in trade header, there'll be something called trade ID, and you just say retrieve trade where trade ID equals this. You get the whole thing at once. You can immediately see it. Your lawyer or your financial expert can go through that derivative description and immediately understand it without doing all the work that you had to do here to pull that together. So that makes it so much easier to pull together the complex data. So if you're just grabbing Word files, that doesn't matter so much. But if you're doing a lawsuit that involves pulling a lot of financial data to analyze trends, like, you know, did the firm discriminate against certain kinds of clients, or did it overcharge for derivatives, then you're going to have these kind of complex things, and you're going to be spending a lot of time pulling that together, making it accessible. If you can get the information, if you can just get the original trades that will be stored in this kind of format, you just store them in MarkLogic. You just give them, you can easily find them, make them accessible to your lawyers. And so that's the beauty of the document model, that the information you get is almost always initially created as documents, that what comes into you is an order, or is a derivative, or is a legal agreement, is a credit report. And so that comes in there, easy to understand, designed to be human readable. And then if you have a system that can handle that kind of data from the beginning, it's going to be 1,000 times easier for you than if you have to take the derived data where you break it apart into all those tables and make it harder to access. And so at a technology level, the key to how MarkLogic works is we have the universal index. And so most databases, the way it works is you have a team that just creates a model that describes how the data works. And you do that before you start developing your system. And then once you've done that, then you figure out how to take your raw data and turn it into data that can fit into that schema or data dictionary. With MarkLogic, it doesn't work that way. What happens is you give us the data. So like if you come back to, you know, here, we will take that customer ID is part of the schema. So we'll say this document has an element called customer ID, which has a value of 101. So now, as soon as you've loaded that data, you can do structured queries. You can say, show me all the documents where customer ID equals 1001. And you never had to formally model that. You never had to formally explain to MarkLogic how that worked. You just gave us data, and then we stored the schema as data, and we stored the data as data, and we can just pull it together, make it immediately accessible. So that's what that does, is it gets rid of a huge percentage of your modeling problem. You just bring it in there, and so you're going to have to do a little bit of modeling after the fact. So you might have one data source might say gender, one may say sex, one may say male, one may say capital M. You might have to do a little work to make that all common, to make it easily accessible. But again, it's only going to be on those small number of attributes you need to access the information, so that you can then give it to your end users so that they can use. You don't have to go through the whole thing like you had to do with the relational technologies. And so again, the benefits are you can load it easy, keep bringing new stuff in there. And so then this is where you bring it together. So you turn male and female into M and F. You come in there, and if some data is in pounds and some is in dollars, and you want to find all of the mortgages you issued that were more than $200,000, you want those to be in consistent units. So you may do a little work up front to do that, to make it so it becomes easy to query and search the information. And the key thing is you can just keep doing this incrementally. You load it in there, you make it accessible. And so then you can also be enriching your data. So a lot of lawsuits are specific to geographic regions. And so here we're taking addresses and then looking up the GPS coordinates and then storing the GPS. So now you can do things like, say, show me everything within 100 miles of Manhattan, or show me everything within a rectangle that's centered around Pittsburgh. And so all those kind of searches now become easy. It was just a single step of going through your data, adding that kind of functionality to it. And then the key differentiator with us and most of the other new technologies is there is this thing called Semantics, where you bring data in there and it links dissimilar data apart. So a lot of the flexibility you've seen up to now is inherent in the document model. So you could do some of this in many of the competitive products, but where they break down is that you want to be able to link things. You want to be able to say, this mortgage had these payments associated with it, things like that. So you want to be able to come in and just say, you know, if you're worried about criminal operations, some kind of thing, you say that this had this and this had this, and point to it, make it all flow through there. And so then the other thing MarkLogic does is we have real security. So you don't want to, you know, every major firm in the mortgage industry is concerned about being on the front page of the New York Times because all of their customer data got hacked and sold to, you know, mobsters or something. And MarkLogic is the most secure of all the new databases. So you have row-level security. You can hide individual elements. You can say, never show a social security number to these users. You have to have this level of security. You can hide it, and it gets encrypted on disk. So even if, you know, it's like with Equifax, the problem was that they kept data unencrypted on disk. So once somebody was able to break into the system, they could just grab files that were full of information. If they had been using MarkLogic, that data would have been encrypted, and then even if somebody broke into the system and copied the file over, they never would have been able to see it or access it or get at it. And so MarkLogic, we're the only common criteria certified NoSQL database, and common criteria is a very difficult to pass government standard that the intelligence and defense agencies and a lot of foreign governments use to make sure that the databases are really solid. And so anyway, that's the background of where MarkLogic fits in and how we can help, you know, firms develop applications like the RBMS online platform. So over to you guys.
Great, thank you, David. And now Michael will now share how ESI Lab utilizes MarkLogic in the latter phases of RMBS litigation.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks, David. My name is Michael Will. I'm the CEO of ESI Laboratory, or Easy Lab as we refer to ourselves. I'm actually a former litigation attorney at Clever Chance and Lloyd's of London, and I've also practiced particularly in the RMBS space with Quinn Emanuel. What we're going to talk about right now is the use of MarkLogic in the context of RMBS litigation, which is a particular type of litigation. I'm just going to share my screen now. Briefly, we chose MarkLogic because of its flexibility and its ability to scale. You know, cases typically that we deal with have in the region of around about 7 million pages of documents and huge volumes of data. And this data comes in multiple formats from multiple sources. So the ability to ingest data into the MarkLogic framework and operate on it without having to go through the effort you would have to go through with regard to traditional relational databases is something that a big plus from our perspective. What we're going to talk about in the context of RMBS litigation are the current practices that are used by a number of litigation participants. Now, we're not just talking about the parties themselves, we're talking about the law firms that represent those parties, the expert witnesses who are instructed, together with a number of very specialized vendors that operate in this particular market. And what we're going to do is show how we've used MarkLogic to reduce law firm, vendor, and expert fees to quite some considerable extent, and also improve data accuracy. So where does this data originate from? Well, the data comes from multiple parties. Throughout the life cycle of a mortgage, before it ever becomes touched by litigation, it will have been the data will have been in the hands of the originators themselves that originated the loans. Perhaps after securitization, you'll have the mortgage services who will be involved, and due diligence vendors as well, who might perform due diligence on the mortgages before they're repackaged into securities. The data itself traditionally comes from documentation. This might be transactional or offering documents. There'll be representations made, for example, in the securities that provide the cash flows that investors invest in. There are underwriting guidelines, loan files, very voluminous loan files. The average loan file is in the region of 1,000 pages. There will be documentation generated during the course of the litigation audit. So let's say, for example, someone says that during a period 2008 through to 2010, they were earning $300,000. What will happen is that in the context of the litigation or subsequent litigation, lawyers and experts will do bankruptcy checks. And if someone's been declared bankrupt, they have to state what their income was during a particular period. And if there's an inconsistency between what they said on their loan application and what they said in their bankruptcy proceedings, then you know there's a little bit of a problem. In addition, because of the sheer volume of information, it's not just emails and loan files that we're looking at. There's also databases that need to be ingested into the system. For example, there might be mortgage loan schedule data or loan tape data that has to be brought into the litigation so that you can see whether or not the data on the mortgage loan schedule actually matches the data on the underwriting file. Now, in the context of this particular litigation, because the task is so enormous, law firms and experts typically lack both the personnel and technology to perform the necessary tasks to extract and analyze data. So what they do is they instruct an external firm of vendors to do this on their behalf. These vendors will use a combination of permanent and temporary personnel. They will scale up and down depending on the needs of the litigation. And they will also use frequently internal proprietary technology that is not exposed to the outside world. So what happens is that really all the lawyers and the re-underwriting expert has access to is a very limited subset of data. In order to generate this subset of data, first of all, written instructions have to be prepared by the expert in the law firm and provided to the re-underwriting vendor. These are the procedures that and the rules that the re-underwriting vendors, when they're reviewing these loan files, again, have to abide by. In addition, what happens is that for each particular loan, if there's a defect in that loan, which we often call a finding or a breach finding, some boilerplate language is used as a starting point, and that is marked up. And the idea behind using the boilerplate language is to ensure that there is, on the whole, a level of consistency across multiple re-underwriting vendors who are writing the different, or might write different narratives to describe the same thing. What is also prepared at the outset is a template, an expert spreadsheet template, and this contains a variety of information. There's loan level information, so that's the loan identifiers, the addresses, the dates, the loan purpose, lien position, product type, documentation type, occupancy status, property values, ratios of LTV, CLTV, and debt-to-income ratios, and credit scores. And then there's the breach analysis information, breach identifiers, breach category, breach narratives, risk factors and compensating factors, and finally, citation information. Every assertion made during the course of the litigation has to be referenced back to a particular piece of documentary evidence. So you'll need to capture the file names for underwriting guidelines, page ranges, loan files, and related citations. Now, what pops out at the end of this litigation, it's actually rather crude. It's less sophisticated than even a relational database, or it's a spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet contains all the information relating to the breaches in the loans, and it's attached as an exhibit to the expert's report. The report itself will refer to high-level statistics, like say 75% of all loans had an occupancy misrepresentation, for example. The spreadsheet structure is typically has a row per breach, and can extend over many, many columns. So there might be 100 to 130 columns. The data volume is getting bigger and bigger. In fact, we're actually finding that many spreadsheets actually exceed the limits provided for by Excel. You might have 1 million plus individual data items and 30,000 individual pin sites to particular pages. Vendor output, what we found, is of variable quality and often requires extensive QA. This QA itself is performed by the expert and the law firm. It's a manual process that's both expensive and time-consuming, and it'll require access to external documentation, the instructions that the expert provides the vendors, access to boilerplate language, underwriting guidelines, loan files, and supporting documents. And the types of QA that are performed fall into three general groupings. There's the general QA, so you're ensuring that the data itself is in the expected format and appears to be in the correct column. Then you get slightly more sophisticated in terms of the content of the breach narrative. You're making sure that the narrative complies with expert instructions, doesn't deviate materially from the boilerplate language, and accurately reflects data values enumerated in the 100 to 130 cells on the same row as the breach narrative. So you can't have in one location the spreadsheet saying that the DTI is 60%, and in another location in the breach narrative saying it's 90%. You need to make sure they're consistent. And of course, you also need to make sure that the narrative itself makes sense. In addition, one of the big challenges in this particular realm is to make sure that the references to the supporting data, which are done by pin sites, these are references to the Bates number endorsed on the pages, are accurate. So you need to provide the location of information citing the PDF document, and you also have to, lawyers spend time opening up PDF files and searching and scrolling to the relevant page. It's not very efficient, to say the least. And it also has to be performed multiple times. You'll find that the lawyers and experts will go back to the expert report and provide updates. Their initial review will be prior to the release of the first expert's report. Then there'll be another review prior to the expert's deposition, after the expert's deposition, after review of an opponent's expert's report, and after a review of the opponent's expert deposition. Then prior to trial, and also during trial. So you will go back to this data many, many, many times, and without a shadow of a doubt, people are actually quite shocked by the number of mistakes that they come across time and time again. So in order to address these inefficiencies, we decided to deploy MarkLogic, and I'm pleased to say we've actually been very successful in doing it. Our user base comprises global law firms, expert witnesses, and the leading re-underwriting vendors. We currently have 10 very high-profile cases in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And our largest case to date involves 68 securitizations and 7,000 loans. The system is designed to be available to multiple parties online, provides enhanced QA functionality and querying and reporting functionality. The benefits our users have been able to reap are lower fees and better data, and also query and reporting independence. Within the system, we've designed it so that the lawyers themselves can design the form of spreadsheet, they can configure it, and they can also perform on-the-fly queries. All right, so let's just take a look at a high level before we go into the detailed demo of an overview of the features. One of the things that is quite challenging for the law firms is actually monitoring and directing the flow of work. There are multiple people who are interested in the data, and it's very difficult to track when you're using a spreadsheet. So by bringing everything into one central location, it's possible for everybody to get instant access to the status of a particular loan within the litigation. So who's reviewed it at the first level, the second level, the third level. So, and on each occasion, you'll be able to tell your bosses in an instant where a particular loan is in the review life cycle and when it's likely to be finished. It's also possible to assign loans to particular people. Some law firms have a practice of making people specialists in income misrepresentation breach findings. Others will be experts in, I don't know, BLS findings, for example. So you can target the flow of loans and to be reviewed to particular individuals with specific experience. In addition, because these loans are reviewed multiple times, they go through multiple iterations. Within the system, you always have access to the latest version of a particular loan. Now, having said that, because the loans are changed, we've actually built in change control functionality. People can edit loans, and we save every single version of a loan and edit to a loan. And we also provide black line functionality so people can see how the text has changed. In addition, we provide advanced reporting capability. Users have the ability to configure their expert spreadsheets. They can rename columns. They can reorder columns. They can generate trial exhibits. And they also have charting capability, which allows them to track the impact of loan or breach suppressions. Not every loan will have a material breach. There may be a very minor breach that's not deemed material in the context of litigation. So you need to knock those loans out of all the calculations in terms of percentage breaches prior to trial. And in addition, we provide an on-the-fly X-query functionality. So, for example, if someone wanted to build a compound query of tell me how many material loans where the borrower has a DTI greater than or equal to 80% and rely on BLS findings. It may be that during the context of litigation, the BLS findings become an issue. Judge may make a ruling knocking them out, and you want to find out the impact that it will have on your case. That would take an awful lot of effort using the traditional approach, but with our system, it can be done in a matter of less than a minute. So let's actually take a look at the application itself. This is running locally on my desktop. If I just log out here. This is a MarkLogic application itself. We've built everything within MarkLogic using X-query. Every user has username and a password. You select login. You can accept the terms and conditions. If I show menus here, I go through to subscribers, User Lab, the client is a law firm, and the particular litigation that this law firm is dealing with is Investor Fund LLC v. Big Bank Inc. What I'm about to show you here is dummy data for confidentiality reasons and protective order. We can't show you live data. And all that happens is the user selects review, accepts the protective order that relates to this litigation, and then he's presented with a series of batches. Here we have the all latest loans batch. I select this batch here. And this takes me to the dashboard. Now the dashboard, or the launchpad as we call it, is Command Central. You can control many, many things here. The first thing that you can do is review the workflow. So here you have the operator or the law firm, what level of review each particular breach has gone through. Each loan is demarked. The delimiter between each loan is this horizontal line here. So that you can see that here there are 1, 2, 3, 4 breaches. And we can tell where this particular loan is in the life cycle by monitoring the numbers here. So this is the law firm's review, this is the expert's review, this is the vendor's review. And it's a very easy way for the lawyers and the client, frankly, to monitor how many loans are done each day, for example. So those are the admin columns. And then we have information relating to who's responsible for the operation of a review of a loan, the batch that the loan relates to. This is the universal loan identifier. And what you'll see here is that we have these toggle switches. So these toggle switches allow me to suppress a loan. And so you don't delete a loan, you suppress its impact in the context of the litigation. So you can suppress at the loan level, as we're doing here, just by clicking on these particular toggles. You can also suppress at the individual breach level or the breach category level. So if I select undisclosed mortgage DTI here, just by selecting one of them, you'll see this one here will change and elsewhere. So if I select this here, you can see that they've all changed. And where this becomes really useful is in the context of the charting functionality that we have. I'm just going to suppress this loan as well. If I go to charts here, what it's doing is it's analyzing all the live loans at the moment, and it's performing analysis at the securitization level, at the loan level. You can see here that we have 2 suppressed loans out of a total of 389. So 389 plus 2, 387 plus 2 gives you the total number of loans. And you're able to see also how many loans contain material breaches here. And what we have are some analysis. So if I go into the representations table here, each breach finding constitutes a misrepresentation. So what you're able to do is to perform representation level analysis. So you can see here, this is the loan count without suppressions. And what will happen is that depending on whether or not there's loans at the suppressions at the securitization level, the loan level, the breach category level, the breach finding level, or the materiality level, you'll see that the numbers here will change. So these are the numbers that people will include in their experts report. Very advanced functionality here. Now, in order to review a particular loan or a particular finding, what you do is you click on a particular hyperlink here. So I'm going to go into this particular loan here. I'll unsuppress it. And you can see that the text in green is a hyperlink. Oops, I'm going back to click the wrong button. So I click on this hyperlink here, and this takes me to the review screen. I'm going to give myself a little bit more space. And what you have here on the left-hand side is the document panel. This is the breach panel, and this is the review panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this particular breach, which relates to, let me just check it in again, undisclosed mortgage DTI. And you can see here that you have access to the breach narrative. Down here, what you have are the references to the individual pages that support this particular breach finding. So let's say that I want to look at the applicable guideline that has been deemed to apply to this particular loan. I click on this particular link, and it instantly brings me to the relevant page. And I can cycle forward and back here. Now, let's just say that some information within this particular document is of interest to parties, and instead of someone, notwithstanding the fact that they're taken to the relevant page, having to read the whole page, what is possible for the user to do is to actually mark out a particular section and highlight it. And here I'm going to apply a re-underwriting zone here. So the user's eye, whenever he comes to this particular page again, will always go to the relevant place. It's very simple to remove this. All I do is just select the particular highlight. We have access to the representations and warranties that apply here, together with the ability to message, instant messages. We record every single piece of traffic between the parties. So you can direct it to first level reviewer, for example, and I save it here. And what happens now is you can see the chain of communications. Here's the first comment, here's the next one. And every comment is timestamped and we know who made it. If I want to actually edit some data, all I do is I check out the loan. And by checking out the loan, what happens is that other parties who are using the system can still see the loan, but they cannot perform any operation on it in terms of making changes. And the reason for that is I'm about to make some changes. So if I select this pen here, what will happen now is that I'm going to delete some text. If I save these changes, what you can see now is that I have a black line. What you'll also see are these numbers here. When you make a change, you don't overwrite the original breach narrative, you make another copy of it. So it's possible to go back and forward and you have a complete history. Let me make another change. There you go. There's another change. In addition, to the extent that you want to check the text of a particular narrative, if I check the loan back in, and I go back to the plain view, here we go. You can, let's say this narrative reference the credit score, you can go to the credit score data that relates to this particular loan. You might have overview details, for example, that you're interested in. This will provide the loan summary, income analysis, debt analysis, and the conclusion of the expert as to whether or not this is a material or non-material loan. And we can see that it was originally a material loan and it's been changed to no. So this is the review screen. Once you've made your reviews, what you will want to do is to do some queries, perhaps. So if I now go to the query tab, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look, create a query, FICO scores. Let me just delete this one here. FICO score greater than or equal to 650. So I add the query. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the credit score data point here. So I go to credit score, and I'm going to look for credit score at origination. And I'm going to build the query greater than or equal to 650. I add the clause. I then query the matter. There's the query, and if I want to review the results, before I do so, though, we can see that here's my query. The total loans at issue is 362. Of these loans, there's one that's suppressed, and there are 361 that are active. I can then view the results, and what you can see here, by virtue of the fact that there's a pink color, is that I've included here the suppressed loans. I can view the results, and I can see the results on screen. And I've got so if I click on this button here, it takes a little while to generate the HTML. It's being done on the fly. Here we go. So this is the HTML version. And you can download an external Excel report. Now, the ability to customize the Excel report and the reports is actually very important in the context of this litigation. An enormous amount of time is spent setting up the form of report. What we've actually been able to do within the system is provide a configuration screen for our users. I think it's still building the table. There we go. There's show menus. I'm going to log out and log back in. Try again. This is the matter-specific operation screen, and what it allows you to do, for example, is edit data panels display settings. So if I click on this particular button here, and then open all panels, this is the means by which you can configure the data panels as well as the form of external spreadsheets. So you can move items up and down, you can change a data column. I click on the button here, for example. And everything's configurable. So if I want to move this one, this particular data point down, I select down, and you can see it's moved. So no more going to your vendor saying, I want to, if you're a lawyer, saying, I want to move this particular column to this location. You have it entirely within your particular control. Okay, that's a brief overview of the system. It has much more functionality. If there are any questions, I would be delighted to answer them.
Sorry about that, I was on mute. Thank you both, David and Mike, for this very informative webinar. We have several questions that have been submitted. The first one is, how does ESI Lab exchange data with the vendors?
Okay. Right now, we're working with all the major data vendors and exchange data with them in a variety of formats. Some vendors tend to prefer spreadsheets, but the more sophisticated of them prefer to exchange XML data that conforms to our data schema. Data is usually exchanged by SFTP because of volume, but we're also working on exchange via web services as well.
Thank you, Mike. The next question has come in is, what kind of return on investment does an ESI Lab subscriber gain?
Clearly, this varies from case to case, but on average, we've managed to reduce the legal expert QC fees by approximately 50% when compared to the traditional spreadsheet-based approach. And in addition, not only are we providing better data, but some of our clients have found that the system's capabilities have enabled them to uncover additional causes of action, which in turn resulted in higher levels of settlement offers and awards of damages at trial. In some cases, these amounts run to 7 figures, so it's not an insubstantial sum.
Great, thank you, Michael. The last question has come in is, what is the business model?
We offer two business models. There's an enterprise license for serial RMBS litigants, like big banks, for example, as well as our monthly subscription model for law firms and experts. We're very flexible in terms of the business model.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. This will conclude today's broadcast. You'll be able to access the recorded version of this webinar in the archive section of the DCL website, located at www.dclab.com. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.